and I'm going to turn the meeting over to you, Becca.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us at this meeting today and for being interested in the judicial campaigns. Uh, the reason that I got so interested in helping us elect judges statewide is that, as you said, I'd been involved in Neighbors on Call. I founded it now 10 years ago, and it's now called Team Up NC because it's still my volunteer hat, but we merged with county to county, and now it's called Team Up NC. But the whole idea of trying to flip key legislative seats and hold key legislative seats in order for us to protect people from the worst things that were happening um, still is super important. But we also all know that without protecting people at the judicial level in our courts, that there's only so much we can do. And so we need to do both of those things. And so I'm really proud to be in this fight to help us elect pro-democracy, re-elect our pro-democracy judges, elect more pro-democracy judges, and we have a long-term plan to do it. So I'm gonna share with you just some basic, like some 101 stuff, because I think we all understand, because we're all interested in politics, how important the judiciary is, but it's kind of hard to make it concrete and like put your finger on exactly what to say about it and exactly where we stand. So if you already know this, great, and bear with me, and I hope that you'll view it as like just a chance to take in a structure where that you could then present to someone else. And if it's new to you, that's great too. But I think we all just need to be able to turnkey this to other people to be able to share what's so important, like really why. And I think we really are building a movement to help get a lot of momentum. I think everybody understands now, like why breaking the supermajority in the legislature is so important, for example. But I think we're now getting to a point where a lot of folks are really starting to understand what's so important in the judiciary too. And so that's what we just need to keep growing. So, all that said, so this is a 101. And then after I share it's a pretty short slide deck. After I share my slide deck, I'm going to pass it over to Judge Hampson, and he will fill in many more, much more detail about what happens in the courts and take lots of your questions about it. So I'm very excited that we now have our slate now that the primary is over. So Judge Christine Walczyk is going to join our team. So Justice Anita Earls for NC Supreme Court, and three Democrats running for the North Carolina Court of Appeals, Judge Arrowood and Judge Hampson, who are already on that court, and Judge Christine Walczyk, who is currently, she represents you in Wake. She's a district court judge in Wake. So I think we all know generally that we can have nice things. This is a purple state. People agree with most of the things that we want. We need to take back the courts to get those things. The guardrails of democracy, fair maps, voting rights, due process, public school funding, all of that is upheld through the state courts. And if our courts were truly doing their job on the whole to serve as a check on the state legislature, then they could uphold our Constitution. And that would be how we would get all those things that we want. So we are not an extreme state. We're an extremely gerrymandered one. And now with right-wing extremists running our courts, which I'm going to tell you a little more about, they're enabling extremism in the legislature rather than serving as a check on it, which is the job they are supposed to do. The good news is that we elect our judges and we have the power to make the change. The mechanisms to make change are in our hands. We are in the middle of a plan to take back the courts that I will tell you about. So we can flip both the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals before the next round of redistricting. So just the basics, we do elect our judges. That is not true in every state. And also, these are partisan elections. Whether we like that or not, whether we think that's right or not, that is how it is. So, and also that is not how it is done in all states. We have two categories of courts, trial courts and appellate courts. So appellate just means they hear the appeals. So the trial courts run in districts. So that's the district court. So I mentioned earlier Judge Christine Walsick, who's from Wake County, who's now going to run for the statewide Court of Appeals. District courts, those judges are elected for 4-year terms. All the others are 8-year terms. So Superior Court is also elected in a district, and then they serve a wider area than that. And then statewide elections are the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. So we all get to vote for that slate of 4 statewide judges. That means gerrymandering, not a thing when we're talking about electing those judges. That does not hold us back. The Court of Appeals hears the appeals first, and 90% of cases stop there. So that is the court of last resort for most cases. And then the last few go up to the Supreme Court at the discretion of the Chief Justice. So I'm just going to go through this super fast, but just for all of us to understand the differences. The district court hears misdemeanor charges, civil cases under a certain amount, family law, juvenile cases. The Superior Court hears some appeals from district court, but also felony charges, civil cases above that $25,000 amount. Court of Appeals, they decide in groups. So they decide in a panel of 3. I'm sure you've heard of a panel of judges. They decide in a panel of 3. And as I said, 90% of the appeals stop there. And so they hear everything: voting rights, gun owner responsibilities, school funding, I mentioned already. And then the Supreme Court, which decides on a majority decision. So the whole bank, 7 judges, hears it, and then they decide on a majority. So, MAPS, school funding, corporate accountability. We'll go into a little bit more about what decisions get made in the appellate courts. Oops, I'm looking at one screen and not advancing. Sorry. Okay. So we're going to just talk nuts and bolts about the appellate courts. That's where I'm going to focus, is on the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. And I'll remember to advance my slides now. So I work for the Democratic Party. I'm saying we, the Democrats, had a majority on the court for several years before 2023. So go back to 2022 with a Democratic majority. There were 2 really important decisions that happened. One was that the court said gerrymandering violated the state constitution. And so they then rejected the maps that the legislature had drawn and said those are unconstitutional, draw new ones. We ended up with a congressional map that gave us a 50-50 delegation to Congress. We had 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans coming out of that decision. They also said that the legislature had to meet the requirement to provide a sound basic education for our kids, and that nearly $700 million just needed to be moved right away to public schools. Like, it was owed and it needed to be moved. So that's 2022. Then there's an election. Democrats lost the court. Republicans took over a majority, and in early 2023, like before the ink is dry, they reheard the gerrymandering case. They just said, well, we just want to talk about that one again. And they said, it's actually fine. You can gerrymander. And they gave the legislature free rein. So now we see the downstream consequences of that. So right away, the legislature redrew the maps. And in the next election, we ended up where we are now. We lost 3 Democrats. So we ended up with 4 Democrats and 10 Republicans going to Congress instead of the 7-7 we had before. And when Hakeem Jeffries was running for speaker, he needed those 3 votes. That was it. Those 3 votes that we had lost because of the change in our Supreme Court were the difference between a Democratic majority in Congress and a Republican majority in Congress. So now they know they have free reign. You may remember Donald Trump asked Phil Berger to give him one more, and so they gerrymandered again to try to take that congressional district one from Don Davis. We hope we can still hold on to that, but they certainly are trying to disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of Black voters in that district. So they also, in that same year, halted the school funding that the court had said needed to be paid. They said, well, we're just going to think about that. There's a new question about whether or not it actually has to be paid. So they heard it 2 years ago. They said, we'll just stop the payment while we decide. And they just haven't decided. So that we're still waiting on that money. The other things, and I'll get back to Katie mentioned Phil Berger's son. We'll get back to that in a second. So some other things that the courts have done at the appellate level are allowing the legislature to take power from the Board of Election, take the appointment power that the governor had to appoint to the Board of Elections and handing that over to the Republican auditor. I'm sure you remember that one. Or letting Duke Energy raise rates and saying that, yeah, customers should pay for coal ash cleanup. So that can be, you can add that to their bill too. Republican judges on the Court of Appeals also ruled that it would be okay to throw out 70,000 ballots during the whole the challenge to Justice Riggs race. Those 70,000 ballots included overseas service members. And then our very own Judge Hampson wrote an incredible dissent to that ended up being referenced by the federal judge who put a stop to the whole thing. And the only reason that there was a stop to the whole thing was because it did go to federal court. So the Supreme Court, they upheld a part of that ruling that had come out of the Court of Appeals. They were ready to let Griffin throw away all those votes too. So Katie mentioned Phil Berger. So our Senate president, Phil Berger Sr., his son, Phil Berger Jr., is on the Supreme Court. He'll be up in 2028. But five that I know of, and Judge Hampson, correct me if I'm wrong, 5 cases that directly involve Phil Berger Sr. have already gone to the court. I mean, watching this race that's happening now where he's now down by 23 votes in his own primary election, you have to wonder, is something going to go up in front of the court? I have no idea, but what would happen? So his son, Phil Berger Jr., has not recused ever when the cases have come in front of him that involve his dad, and so far has always ruled in his dad's favor. Am I right about that, Judge Hampson? 5? Do you know offhand?
Something. It's something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. So here's the plan. We have a plan to take back the courts. Here we are in 2026. Now, step 1 was holding on to Justice Riggs' seat, which we did. We did do that. One thing done. So we are here with unfair maps, 5 Democrats, and this is just talking about the Supreme Court, 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats on the court. It looks like this. We have Justice Earls and Justice Riggs, the only 2 Democrats on the Supreme Court. Justice Earls is up in 2026. That is the only seat up from that court in 2026. So our number 1 job is we have to reelect her. And in 2028, 3 Republicans are up. So that means that we could have a Democratic majority in place before the next round of redistricting. So that would change our state for decades, because then our voices could actually be heard. So after 2028, that's when we could have fair maps change our state. That's why that's so important. So now let's talk about the Court of Appeals. So there's 15 seats on that court, and you may remember I said a few minutes ago that they hear cases in panels of 3. So there's only 3 seats left on this court. Judge Hampson, Judge Arrowood, and Judge Collins. But Judge Collins is not running again, and so Judge Walsick is running for that open seat. They're all on the ballot. There are no Republicans on the ballot, so we are down to the last 3 Democrats that we need to protect in 2026. And then in 2028, 5 Republican seats come up, including our friend Jefferson Griffin. So we can flip all of those seats in 2028. So the recap is, in 2026, we're just protecting Democrats. And in 2028, we're flipping 3 on the Court of Appeals. 3 on the Supreme Court, 5 on the Court of Appeals. Once again, this is our slate. Justice Earls, Judge Arrowood, Judge Hampson, and Judge Walsick. And I'm going to let Judge Hampson tell you all about himself, but just quick information about the others. Justice Earls has been on the Supreme Court for 7 years. Before that, she fought for our civil rights as an attorney for 30 years. She is the only Black woman on the court. She is dedicated to protecting the basic freedoms of all of us. Judge Arrowood has been on the court for 9 years. Before that, he had served on the Superior Court, and he is the only LGBTQ statewide elected official in the entire South, which I just find so shocking. Judge Toby Hampson, you'll hear from him in just a moment. He was elected in 2018. And Judge Christine Walsick, who sits on your district court in Wake County. She's been there for 19 years, and her colleagues chose her as a bipartisan group chose her as the lead judge in general civil court. She's very, very highly regarded. So if you would like to know the plan to take back the Supreme Court, print it out, give it to a friend, put it on your fridge, know it like the back of your hand. You can print it out at that website, ncdp.org/judges. If you would like to get out with us to talk with neighbors about why the courts are so important, we have a very easy, out-of-the-box canvassing program where you just sign up, you get sent a minivan list, and wherever you're standing, we all have the same list, but wherever you're standing, it gives you the 16 doors closest to you. So you just put it in at your house, and you'll get your 16 neighbors. And the material is a printed home thing with a quick little note that you write about why, you're sharing information about the courts. It's very simple and low key, but really powerful tool because anyone can do it at any time. And so we're encouraging folks to get groups together to do that. And then we meet at the end of every month to come back together for updates and check in and, share new information about changes to the script or things like that. So you can sign up for that at ncdp.org/justice. And you can find all the candidate bios and the plan. And if you'd like to donate, of course, you can do that at the /judges site. And I am more than happy to connect anytime. So please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to have my slide deck used in trusted spaces. So if you have an opportunity with a partisan hat that you want to be sharing this, or you want to adapt it for your own use in a different way, I'm thrilled for this information to get shared. So with that, I will pass to Judge Hampson to tell you directly about himself and all the things we need to know about the courts.
Well, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to take part in this session. I am Judge Toby Hampson, one of your statewide elected North Carolina Court of Appeals judges. Just a brief bit about me. I grew up mostly down in Moore County, attending North Carolina public schools like Sandhills Farm Life and Union Pines. Graduated from the North Carolina School of Science and Math. My mom taught math at Sandhills Community College, so she was very disappointed in me when I ended up going to law school, as you can imagine. So graduated from undergrad up in DC at American before coming back home to North Carolina and attending law school at Campbell when it was still down in Bowie's Creek and Harnett County. I began my career at the North Carolina Court of Appeals, serving as a law clerk to Judges Eddie Green, Wanda Bryant, and Bob Hunter before going into private practice, where I focused my career on handling cases in our state court of appeals and state Supreme Court, representing everybody from indigent parents whose parental rights were at risk to children injured by defective products, to injured workers, even into complex commercial litigation. So I really built a career focused on our state court of appeals and state Supreme Court. As Becca mentioned, I was elected to the court in 2018 and have been serving there for the last 7 years. And I'm so ready to run for re-election in 2026. It's funny when people find out that I'm a judge. Usually one of the first things they'll say to me is, well, I hope I never have to appear in front of you. And let me assure you, the feeling's mutual. I hope you never have to appear in front of us either. But that's kind of the point, right? You should have faith that our courts are doing the right thing, even when it's not your case, because the cases we decide at the appellate level impact the lives of all North Carolinians in all 100 counties. That's the thing. On my court, the North Carolina Court of Appeals, we decide criminal cases and civil cases. On the criminal side, it can be anything from a DUI, right, all the way up to a first-degree murder case. We don't do capital cases. If there's a capital case, that goes immediately to the state Supreme Court, but we do have cases involving sentences of life in prison. On the civil side, our jurisdiction runs the absolute gamut. Everything from family law cases and cases involving parental rights to workers' compensation cases, if you're hurt on the job, to other types of injury cases, to contract cases and business disputes, estates, tax law, even property rights, right, including zoning and planning cases coming up from the various municipalities and counties around the state. But what we're seeing more and more are these cases that are actually like having huge direct impacts on people. For instance, just last week, our court decided a case involving Duke Energy, where it held that Duke Energy could not charge back, and this was actually an opinion written by Judge Arrowwood, could not charge back for rates for improvements it had made back to consumers back in the past, and said, no, you were not allowed to do that. But then also had to turn around and hold that because the legislature, the General Assembly, had made changes to the law in the meantime, that Duke Energy was not in fact required to refund those. That's because of actions by our General Assembly while that case is pending. Becca mentioned the auditor being permitted to take control of the State Board of Elections. Well, that case is currently pending before my court, but it was also a majority on my court that allowed that to happen even while the case challenging the constitutionality of that litigation is pending. So that's a decision of the North Carolina Court of Appeals. Becca also mentioned the Leandro case involving educational funding for our public schools. The reason that funding was put on hold was, again, a decision of a Republican majority on the North Carolina Court of Appeals. So you start to see how these cases have a direct impact on the lives of North Carolinians, both their rights and the wallets, right, and the pocketbooks. And so these are critical decisions that are being made in the judiciary that have a direct impact on North Carolinians. Becca also mentioned the 2022 decision where our North Carolina Supreme Court held that extreme partisan gerrymandering violated the North Carolina state constitution, and how when we lost the majority on that court and Sherry Beasley lost her election that year by 403 votes, 403 votes. That helped shift control of the Supreme Court and led to the current congressional maps ultimately we have now, and the continued indecision on that Leandro case, which has now been pending for over 2 years since it was last reheard. And understand that Leandro case began decades ago at this point. That litigation has been in North Carolina courts for literally decades. So these are just concrete examples of how the North Carolina Court of Appeals and state Supreme Court, are having huge impacts, not just on day-to-day cases, but even on these sort of big ticket cases. And of course, just last year we had Griffin v. State Board of Elections, where Judge Griffin sought to challenge the results of the race won by Justice Allison Riggs for our North Carolina Supreme Court. And as Becca mentioned, that case came to my court. And when that case came to my court, there were the majority, two Republican judges in the majority, were willing to throw out over 68,000 votes potentially of lawful registered North Carolina voters, and sort of shifting the burden and putting on the voters to prove that they were eligible, rather than putting the burden on the Griffin campaign to show that the votes were actually ineligible, right? So completely shifted the burden of proof. And so, yeah, I was proud to dissent in that case, and proud to, basically say you don't change the rules of an election to throw out eligible votes after those votes have been cast, counted, and canvassed. And, what's crazy about that is Becca mentioned a federal judge agreed with me. What she didn't mention is that judge was actually appointed by Donald Trump. And so you have a federal judge appointed by Donald Trump looking at what our state Supreme Court and state Court of Appeals was doing and saying that's unconstitutional. And that personally, for me, that really struck me, that our courts that are designed to be there to protect our constitutional rights and fundamental freedoms are being told that they are in fact acting in a manner that's unconstitutional, right? And so, to me, that's kind of what's at stake in this election in 2026, right? And that's why I believe so firmly we need to elect judges in this moment that will stand up for the rule of law, and that will stand up and protect your constitutional freedoms, your fundamental rights, and simply recognize that our courts can only work when they serve the people and are not beholden to extreme partisan agendas. And so that's why I'm running for re-election in 2026, because I really believe that the courts should be there to serve the public, and the public should have trust and faith that the courts are doing the right thing.